Frances went up, knelt, Queen did her bit, and talked to him for a little while. More than she usually did, whether she'd been primed to, whether she was an admirer of his work, doesn't really matter. She did talk to him, and he spoke back, and finally got up and walked backwards and back to his seat while the band played, a spoonful of sugar and those other sort of strange things that they play at these events. And the Bradford MBE figure, he knelt down and he got his medal pinned to him, and it just so, she didn't really say much, she just said, well done, or something. And it just by some awful, embarrassing bad luck, he happened to let rip with a mighty fart at exactly this moment. And it was the moment the Queen steps back, which she'd done. And it made it look as if she had stepped back because he'd let one go, as it were. So he walked backwards and then turned around, blushing furiously. And then, to make his day worse, at the end of it, when the press gather round and everyone's in their shiny top hats and everything, obviously a huge crowd of press descended on Francis Bacon, and one member of the Bradford Inquirer, or whatever it might be, was sort of asking questions of this forlorn fellow. And Francis, who didn't particularly like talking to the press, and said, oh, well, there was nothing very interesting, but that man was interesting. He virtually farted in the Queen's face. And the press just chased it. He said, the last I saw of him, his hat was bouncing on the cobbles and he was running round the corner. I just thought it was the most wonderful story. Anyway.
Lambeth Walk.
Oh my, there's a thing. Yes. Well, you're seeking to elicit, I must assume.
I'm seeking to elicit.
The story of, in 1984-ish, my agent, who was a man called Richard Armitage, who had come to Cambridge when I was there with Hugh Laurie and Emma Thompson and Tony Slattery. We were on the Footlights, and he sort of scooped us up in his JCB, and we all became his clients. And he was a marvellous man. He had an old Etonian tie and a Bentley and cigars, very old-fashioned and very delightful. One weekend, he invited me to his house in the country, which was called Stebbing, in Essex, in that nice part of Essex around about Dunmow. It's a very much underrated part of an underrated county. And he started talking to me about himself, which he never did. He was a very old-fashioned, sort of rather growly Englishman. And he said, my father was called Reginald Armitage. I said, and my grandparents made their money making pomfret cakes in South Yorkshire. So that's like Pontefract, but yes, pronounced pomfret, right? Okay, pomfret cakes. But my father, Reginald, was very musically gifted. He went to Cambridge, and then he went to the Royal College of Music, and then he was appointed organist at St Anne's, Soho, right? And he heard a lot of modern music being played in his day, jazz music, and he turned out to have rather a facility for composing tunes. I said, well, gosh, that's interesting. He said, yes. But he thought that it was rather embarrassing to the family name to use his own, so he invented a pseudonym under which he could compose, which was Noel Gay. I said, right. And so she said, I know it's an odd name now, but in the time, it was very 30s, it's sunbursts and Noel Gay. And under that name, he was a very successful composer, and he wrote many songs. The Sun Has Got His Hat On, Hey Little Hen, Let's Have a Tiddly at the Milk Bar, The Lambeth Walk, Leaning on a Lamppost, and so on. I said, gosh, that's a great litany of 30s English songs. He said, yes, and many of these were written into a musical called Me and My Girl. I said, wow. Anyway, so gosh, it's getting late. I'll probably go to bed. He said, so here it is. And he pulled out this strange fool's cap. For those of you who are too young to know what fool's cap is, it was like what the standard paper size before the European A4 arrived, a little bit taller and thinner. I guess you could put it into a dunce's shape, which is why it was called that. But anyway, I don't know, why else would it be called fool's cap? I don't know. He gave me this typescript. It was an old typescript, where there were sort of orange rust marks where the punch holes had, gone. And so he said, I'd like you to read it. So it was the show, Me and My Girl. So I read it. He said, and the next morning he said, what did you think? I said, well, it's very interesting. And he looked at me, and there was this pause that seemed like an eternity. And he went, "Oh, I don't know why I'm doing this. All right, okay, you're signed in." And that was the moment I now realized, looking back, on which my entire life pivoted. It was the hinge of everything. And fortunately, I was as good as my word. But the reason I picked Cambridge, this is the Ponzi bit, was that I had fallen in love with G.E. Moore and E.M. Forster and Goldsworthy Lowes Dickinson and Bertrand Russell and Wittgenstein and what were then considered the progenitors and the big influences behind the Bloomsbury movement, and particularly with their cult of personal relations. Forster later, in one of his essays, got into some trouble for saying, if it came to, and this was in reference to some of his friends, the Apostles, which was a group of Cambridge intellectuals, some of whom were people like Guy Burgess, who, of course, was one of the Cambridge spies, the traitors. Forster said, if it came to a choice between betraying my friend or betraying my country, I hope to God I would have the guts to betray my country. And it's that, the primacy, the high doctrine of friendship and personal relations and an absolute instinctive distrust of causes and the abstract that I thought was part of a Cambridge that went all the way back to Cranmer and Latimer and Ridley and not that I was religious, but those who were martyred famously in Oxford. Cambridge produces martyrs and Oxford burns them. And there is a martyrs' memorial in Oxford to prove it. All the ones burnt there were Cambridge people. And there was something about Cambridge that appealed to me. It was the mixture of rigor. I think after all the terrible things I'd done, the thieving and the explosive disappointments of romantic love and physical love and all the other forms of love, agape and eros, I just thought that I needed the discipline and the restless intellectuality and the refusal to accept the world that Cambridge represented. Oxford represents the world, and always has. It's really extraordinary how, going all the way back throughout the history, that Oxford was a royalist stronghold and Cambridge was a Puritan stronghold. And there's nothing attractive about it. I'm not saying for a minute that Cambridge is more attractive. In many ways, it's less attractive. That Cromwell was a Cambridge man, and Oxford was the capital of King Charles's Stuart Cavalier, it was his citadel. And then, as I say, also previously before that, the Cranmers and others. And all the way up, Robert Hewison wrote a very good book called Monty Python, The Case Against. He wasn't presenting the case against it. He was merely recording the opposition to Python. And he writes a very good chapter about the tradition in Cambridge of long, lean, sarcastic Cambridge people, as opposed to short, dark, rather more friendly Oxford people. And you can see it in Beyond the Fringe. There's Peter Cook and Jonathan Miller, as opposed to Dudley Moore and Alan Bennett, who are lovely. How could you not love Alan Bennett? And how could you not love Cuddly Dudley? And how would you not be scared by Peter Cook and Jonathan Miller? And then in the Python era, the same thing. You've got the lovely Michael Palin and the lovely Terry Jones, and you've got the incredibly sarcastic Eric Idle, Graham Chapman, and John Cleese. And he says, the average Python meeting would be Terry Jones and Michael Palin saying, let's have some pantomime Princess Margarets. And John Cleese would go, why? And that tension, as it were, and actually you can even go further forward. You could say, well, Richard Curtis and Rowan Atkinson are a lot more lovable than that awful Hugh Laurie and Stephen Fry, for example. Darts. Oh, now you've got me going. Yeah. Yes, a couple of Mondays ago, an ambition of mine was fulfilled. I sat next to Sid Waddell, who is the voice of darts, that Geordie commentator.
Tell us, Stephen, what he sounds like.
Well, he said, "Twaddle the clips of the darts," he said at one point, which was very exciting, and I was able to come back with Bonnie Taylor, because Phil Taylor is probably the greatest sportsman alive on the planet. You may question the use of the word sportsman next to a darts player, but he is 15 times world champion. He's broken every possible record. I don't think that any other sport in the world has a 15 times world champion. I find darts an absolutely captivating spectacle. And I think one of the things that's most captivating about it is this unspoken, or indeed sometimes quite baldly spoken fact that people think there is a massive disconnect between someone like me enjoying the gladiatorial arena of this extraordinary game, which is performed by rather tattooed working class people. And they therefore think either I'm being like some of those Regency bucks who used to beat up the watch and go, rah, rah, you know, how funny, let's watch some working class people beating each other to death. Or that I'm patronizing, or that I'm trying to be cool. But it's nothing to do with that. There is this unwritten British embarrassment about the fact that darts is it's a pub game, and it's a working class game, and it is a very male game, it has to be said. And it's obviously not attractive to see large, overweight, sweaty men with tattoos, except for the fact that they are so good at their sport, and the scoring of darts is so exciting that you get fantastic games. And I was able, as I said at the time, on live television, so I had to be careful, I'm like a pig in Chardonnay. And it was, that's how I felt. I know it's odd, but there you are. Martin Amis, after all, do you remember London Fields, one of his very best novels, if not his best, I think. It's a really a marvellous book. He writes about darts really well.
Eros.
Ian?
Eros.
Oh, Eros. Yeah. Oh, saw backwards by no accident. No, hang on. It's also an anagram of rose.
Too late.
Too late, you're right. Yes. When you're a child and you watch films on television, you tend to wonder why it is that the action, the comedy, the adventure stops every now and again for this bewildering, baffling nonsense that is eros, that is love. And then when you pass through childhood into adulthood, there's a part of you that sometimes questions why there is any other subject in the world. It is all there is to think about and talk about, love. It is, of course, everything within us. And the extraordinary thing about, and of course there are many shapes to it, the Greeks, I alluded to a couple of them, agape and eros, but there's philos, and there are many others, Greek words for it. There are many nuances of love. And we know how important it is to us, and so much so that we don't even think about it, because we sort of almost couldn't carry on living because of how important it is. And our dreams often tell us this. It's fascinating how often one dreams about a moment of love, or someone one has loved or lost or unrequitedly loved, will come back 30 years later, and you think, oh my God, I'm not still, am I? I am. And I remember seeing a man of 106 being interviewed on television on his 106th birthday. He was in Norfolk, and he was the oldest man in East Anglia, which we were very proud of. And the interviewer said, is there anything that makes you unhappy about being old? Is it, all your friends? He said, well, it's not my friends, but he said, I still miss my mother. And I thought, wow, of course you would. My mother, I'm happy to say, is still alive, but I'm sure I'd miss her, and I'd miss my father if he went. And there's no reason why one shouldn't. If you love someone, you love them forever. It doesn't, just because the string is cut by Atropos, or whichever it was, of the ones who cut the string of one's life, it doesn't mean that your emotional concern is cut. And love is just, it's overwhelming. And I remember when I was first involved in things like Stonewall or gay rights or whatever, and I was asked to speak at a parliamentary thing for Edwina Currie, of all people, who, for all that one may much mock her, she was the one who put in a private member's bill for an equality of an age of consent.